So, Alex, I'm excited for you to be here. I mentioned that I woke up really early this morning to take your assessment, and I kind of did some of the grueling work of exploring my hidden genius. Parts of it were really fun, and parts of it
And
were like, oh, I remember this from grad school. I hated this part of the GRE. Do I have to keep folding the piece of paper and punching the holes in it? Please save me. So, we're going
yes,
to talk all about genius today: aptitude, interest, personality. But first, why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
thanks so much, Diana. It's such a thrill to be here. My name is Alex Ellison. I'm co-author with Betsy Wills of Your Hidden Genius, the science-backed strategy to uncovering and harnessing your innate talents. And I also am an education and career counselor, and I run an education and career counseling practice called Throughline Guidance. And it have, for a long time been very interested in what does it look like when you not just choose your first job, but pivot to your second, third, fourth job. And also, for people looking for avocations and hobbies and fun activities outside of work, how do they go about choosing those things? And so this book was really such an amazing opportunity and an opportunity to explore those questions.
Okay, so we were just jumping into talking about something related to our work style and future. Tell me more about this. Yeah.
So you and I both just spent 4+ years writing a book. And, that's a hard task for everybody, but especially if you work on a shorter time horizon. So one of the elements of the assessment, so we use the assessment called U-Science, which my co-author Betsy Wills helped found the U-Science online assessment. Before that, you had to go spend 3 days at a center and spend, upwards of $1,000 to take an assessment like this. And so this is the real big exciting revolution, that the science isn't new, but the opportunity to take this in a very democratized, very cheap way is new. And so
We call it inexpensive in our house, not cheap.
cheap, yeah. Thank you. You're right.
Don't
I'm like
cheapen
all
your
about
assessment.
I'm all about a deal, baby. No,
It's inexpensive and it's quality. Yes.
It's very, and it's the same quality that you would get spending,
Yeah.
multiple days. So this was something that only a handful of people could do, right, in the past. And so with every book, you get a code, a unique code to take this assessment as part of the purchase of the book. So all that is to say, one of the assessment pieces is in the personality section. As you said, it's one of the three legs of the stool. And we look at time frame orientation. And so some people are very future focused, and they're very motivated and energized with long-term projects. And interestingly, this piece of the assessment really looks at creativity. And when I figured that out, I was like, oh, that is so true, because what it takes to think towards the future and stay working towards a future goal is an imagination. Like, I need to be able to picture myself in France if I'm going to sit and do Duolingo and learn French every day, right? That's a creative endeavor. And that doesn't come super naturally to everybody. But just because you don't have the future focused timeframe orientation, that's obviously not a bad thing. Actually, people who are present focused are very good at staying focused on the here and now, getting things done, getting things turned on time, stopping to smell the roses, right? These are the people who are focused on the present. And so we were just talking about, gosh, what do you need to be able to stick to it for 4 years to write a book? And we would say, for one, you need Sitzfleisch. In German, we would say you need cushion on your bum to sit and write the book. And then you also need, to be able to stick with it even when things get tough, and be able to, look towards the future.
Okay, so you're talking about 1 foot of this 3-foot stool about your hidden genius. So the promise today is for folks to get a sense of what it means to have this genius about them, this unique way of learning and working and being in the world that is really about their assets, not necessarily their deficits. And you describe it as getting to know these 3 components. So one of those components is personality. And is that what the work style would go under?
Exactly.
That teacher versus...
Exactly. So the personality section includes time frame orientation. It also includes work approach and energy style. And so then once you take the assessment, you'll see in your final report, you see this wonderful grid that combines work approach and energy style. So for example, I'm what's called a extroverted liaison. Some people are extroverted generalists. These are like your consummate, managers, politicians. They're excellent at bringing people together. They're all about the team. The introverted specialist is the person who really wants to dive into in-depth research, and they want to be masters in their field and experts in their field. And the extroverted specialist is an interesting one. I can't wait to see how you scored, Diana. But the extroverted specialist is what we call the public expert. And so they are like the Neil deGrasse Tyson or the Carl Sagans of the bunch. They're really good at sharing complex information with a lay audience.
I think that when I was reading about that, that's the one I related to the most. Although I wouldn't describe myself as, in the old terms, as an extroverted, but the way that you were describing introverted versus extroverted energy was a little bit different. I mean, you said they're not parallel paths. They're more sort of like this tangled knot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I've noticed, I mean, I've given this assessment to so many people over the years, as has Betsy. And, a lot of times the extrovert is shocked to find out they're an extrovert. But then when you help them understand where they get their energy, is it in public, forward facing, presenting their work to others, being recognized for their work, getting credit for their work? It's not always the most talkative in the bunch, right? I mean, I don't know. I think about the kind of extrovert I am. And in college, I was the kind of person who wanted to do all my work in a busy cafe. I didn't want to talk to everyone in the cafe, but I needed
Yes.
that bustle, that energy to stay focused, actually, and to stay energized.
Okay, so that is where I wrote my whole dissertation in coffee shops.
I love
And
it. Yeah.
yeah, and lodges with people around. Like, I like the bustle of
Yeah.
that energy. But how do you balance that out with folks that may like I definitely feel that. I feel energized doing work around other people, but that may feel
Mhm.
depleted so when they're with socially around people. So like going to a party or an event, I want to go home and put on my pajamas and crawl back in bed and go to bed at 7 p.m. So what's
Absolutely.
that about?
So one of the things that I've noticed is with specialists versus generalists. Generalists can talk about anything, any topic, whether it's their world of expertise or not. So these are the people who know pop culture. They read the popular magazines. They kind of have seen like all the main shows on Netflix that everyone's talking about on the street, right? The specialist is going to spend a lot of time learning about, watching, reading about things in a more narrow sort of scope of specialization, right? So a more narrow topic scope. And that can change, by the way, over the years. Like they might have their thing in their 20s and their thing in their 30s and their thing in their 40s, but whatever it is, they're going to go all in and they're going to go deep. And so it can be exhausting for the specialist to be in one of those group dynamics where there's a lot of small talk, right? We're talking about the weather. We're talking about what you watched on Netflix. We're talking about, I don't know, what they just read in the aisle at the grocery store. That can actually be very fatiguing for the specialist. So it may not have as much to do with your energy style as your work approach.
I think you're spot on because when I do workshops, retreats, and I'm talking with groups of people that are all psychologists or psychologically
Oh,
oriented or
yeah, you're
spiritually
great.
oriented, I don't leave depleted. I leave
That's exactly
energized.
right.
Okay, so it's a
That's exactly
specialist
right.
versus generalist thing, not necessarily
Yes,
extroverted, introverted.
could be.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's work, there's personality style that
Yep.
includes how you're working, specialist, generalist, liaison. It includes extroverted, introverted, and then what
Yep.
was the third?
And so your time frame orientation.
Time frame orientation. Are you
Yeah.
thinking long term, or are you kind of handling things
in the present.
in the present? Okay, so
Yeah.
that's one style that contributes to our genius, the
Yes.
things that we are good at, strong at, need to know so that we put our seeds in the right soil so that we can thrive.
Yep.
Can we pause there and look at when those become problematic? Because I'm interested in this, like where our genius becomes our problem.
Yes. So it's like we were talking about before we started recording, it's the wrong context. So you have these assets, these talents, but in the wrong context, they can feel like deficits. So, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the aptitude piece even more so, but I can just give you an example with work approach. So if you put a specialist who's the bassoon player in the orchestra, you put them in the role of the conductor, they might be able to do that, but they also may long for the specialty that was playing their instrument and doing their craft. If you are someone who loves leading people and loves the team, and you're all about like the rising tide floats all boats, right? And you put everything into the team, and then you are someone who's able to coordinate multiple team players, right? And then you're asked to get into the weeds. Let's say someone calls in sick, and you have to fill in for that person, and you're in the weeds and you're doing something very, very specific and very specialized, watch out, you're probably going to get burned out pretty quickly.
Could it go the other way too, where say, because I'm thinking about this, say you're a specialist, when I look at my bookshelf, it's 100% psychology or spirituality books. Like that's it. I mean, maybe like there's like a few health books in there, which I kind of put into psychology because our physical health impacts our mental health.
Yes.
And I've gotten kind of burned out on it. I don't want to read another self-help book. Oh my gosh, a self-help podcast? Ugh, no, thank you.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Is there something about that too, where you can almost like your genius can become a problem if you become so specialized that you've put yourself in this little tunnel of specialty, and either you get bored with it, you don't have generalization skills. You can't have a conversation with somebody at that cocktail party because you don't know anything except for your special skills.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yeah, I think we all have a different threshold, right? I mean, so I scored as a liaison, so I'm a little bit more in between the specialist and the generalist. So I need to quote unquote come up for air from the world of education and career counseling. So I also have a lot of education and career guidance handbooks in my office. But if I really want to just unwind, my go-to is nature literature. That's where I love reading nature literature because it just is so removed from my world and it's so refreshing.
Have you read The Hidden Life of Trees?
Oh, I have not yet, but I love
Yeah.
all of that. Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's my go-to because I do feel like I have to kind of come up for air, to refresh and also to reset my mind. And then I come back to my work with a new lens, right? And a new perspective. Some people need that coming up for air, I think, much more frequently. And they need a lot more diversity and variety in their work. And they want myriad activities to work on. They like to balance multiple plates, right? And then others can really stay in that narrower frame of reference for a longer period of time. But as I said, even if you're a specialist, that doesn't mean you're going to have one specialty your whole life. I mean, my husband's a specialist, right? And he's had like very distinct phases and has had many careers, but wherever he is, he's all in. That's the specialist mindset. You're all in. You go for advanced degrees. You get specialized certifications. You know, we interviewed someone for the book who's a specialist, and she's a sommelier, right? And she's like getting the certificate to be an expert in wines in the southern, regions of Italy, like a very specialized. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm all in. If it's brewing coffee or whatever it is that we're doing, making sourdough bread, I will be the specialist.
Yes.
I love it.
Absolutely.
So let's move to aptitude. We have our personality, but then we also have the innate skills, the things that we're just good at. Maybe we don't even know that we're good at it or even we're interested in being good at it. But for whatever reason, you can fold up that little piece of paper and punch the holes in it and you know how to unfold it, which is not my aptitude. Yes. But there were other things on that test when I was taking your test. I was like, I am good at this. I didn't even know I was going to be so good at this. I was flying through. They were so easy for me. More of like the abstract thinking kind of skills. But let's talk about the core four. You described these core four skill sets that are our aptitude that contribute to our genius.
Absolutely. So the aptitudes are the leg of the stool. If there are three legs, like we said, aptitudes, personality, and interests. The aptitude leg is the one that I feel we often know the least about ourselves because it does have to be scientifically tested. We're using psychometrics to really mine for this hidden data, right? This hidden genius. We're all used to taking personality assessments. I love them. I love Enneagram. I love Myers-Briggs. I love all of them. I think they all, work together in a really lovely way. But it's very different. And we're also, I think, familiar with interest surveys. Many of us took interest surveys in high school. That was maybe the career test we took or the career assessment we took was not really an assessment, actually. It was a survey, and it's self-reported. And the thing with reported surveys is that they're biased. We have bias against even ourselves. Aptitudes, though, these are objectively tested using the series of brain games that you took. And just as you said, there were parts of that assessment where you wanted to throw your laptop out the window, and there were parts where you felt, wow, I'm in my element. I'm in my flow right now. And I've never done something like this before. How could I be so good at it? It's a natural a talent. So the core four that we talk about, so we've got idea generation. And so this is how quickly, how rapidly you are able to generate ideas on the fly, off the cuff, under time pressure. All of this is under time pressure, remember. That's how we can really see what your flinch response is, what's natural. A lot of us could do these activities with all the time in the world, but we're looking for time pressure. People who have a high rate of idea generation are what we call brainstormers, and those who don't are what we call concentrated focusers. Again, all about the right context, right? So if you put a concentrated focuser in an air traffic control tower, they are going to be in their element. They can stay super focused on one thing at a time, and they're not going to be easily distracted. The brainstormer, they need to be on that next app development brainstorming team meeting, right? They're going to be golden there. They're going to just keep churning out ideas.
Let's pause there before we move to the other core
Yeah.
four, because I want to spend a little time in brainstorming versus the focused folks, because I've interviewed both. I'm thinking about the brainstormer. I interviewed she's actually my cousin, Sarah, who works for The Daily Show. And she talked about sitting at the table with 12 people the morning before they're going to produce the show that night.
Oh, that's a great example.
They throw joke after joke after joke out, and then they build on each other's joke. And then by the end, they have a sketch, right? So that's sort of you have to have no, there's no reins, there's no limits, there's no corral. You're just putting ideas out there.
100%.
And I imagine that is a room full of brainstormers, but there's got to be one focuser in there. That's
great. That's a great point.
Putting it, taking it and land, okay, we're going to land here. This is what is going to be the scene and how we're going to start to flesh it out into a little 4-minute sketch or whatever they're doing.
And the concentrated focuser, when they come up with an idea, it's coveted. It's like, this is my one idea. They don't come up with many ideas on the fly, but it's like, this is my one great idea. And I really hope it doesn't get rejected, because if it does, it's like the end of the world for the concentrated focuser, because so much power and brain power and energy went into that one idea. But if you have a concentrated focuser on your team, you've got to let them speak up, because that might just be the one idea that takes off, but they are going to have a harder time coming up with several. And so that kind of work environment, that's a perfect example on The Daily Show, that could be fatiguing after some time. But concentrated focusers, man, they keep people on track. They're like, okay, we need to move on. We need to execute, implement, get to work, right?
Mm-hmm. What are you, Alex? Are you?
I am a concentrated focuser.
Yeah.
Yep. And Betsy, my co-author, is a brainstormer. So that's actually a really nice pairing. So, for example, she would say, have we thought of this way of talking about it? And I would say, okay, that actually, I could see that. Let's try that. And then she'd come back and I would, start working on some ideas, and she'd come back and say, wait, what about this way of doing it or approaching it? And that was hard for me, because once I pick something, once I accept something, I want to start executing and working on it. But it was a really good kind of tug back and forth. And I think it helped us write a better book.
Yeah. So what I liked about how you set up all of these core aptitudes was it was always sort of this dimensional perspective. One of the real problems with psychological tests is they put us in boxes. And then you're like, but I kind of am this, but I'm not really that. Because even as you're describing the concentrated focuser and you're describing the brainstorm, I'm like, well, I kind of am a little bit of both. So that's okay, because there's this whole dimension. And you also talk about this third one, which is maybe what I am, which is the idea contributor.
Yes, you're
the idea contributor.
So the idea contributor, everything is on a continuum, all of this. So you're absolutely right. We're not about pigeonholing people, but you may have the majority of one quality, the majority of another. If you're somewhere in the middle, if you are an idea contributor, these are people, we call them idea hitchhikers. They are really good at expanding on and building off of existing ideas and templates. Yes. Okay.
It's the mark.
Yes, it's the mark. So they love taking existing theories. I mean, this is what you do in graduate school, right? You take existing work, existing literature, and you build off of it. You can't just pull something out of thin air. And so I think in academia, that's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. I like combining ideas, adding to them, contributing to them. Great. Yeah. Okay, so this is one of our core four. I want to move to one of them that was one that I wanted to shut my computer and throw it away. And I hated that you made me do this.
Oh, I know.
Which was inductive reasoning. This was the one where you put up a picture of scissors and glasses and a key and die and mittens and a hammer. And you say, what are 3 things in common about all of these things? I'm like, I don't know. They're all stupid pictures on my page.
Oh my goodness.
So what is going on there? Yeah.
You answered just like the majority of engineers that I test.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of my STEM thinkers, these science and technology and engineering folks, they say the exact same thing you just did. They said, I can see multiple connections. I can see, errors and gaps in the connections that I thought of. So I'm scrutinizing those things and I'm overthinking it. And then the time runs out. So we would call someone like that a fact checker. So fact checkers are people who they like to have all the facts, all the information before they move forward with a plan or a decision or a conclusion about something. They like to have the time to gather that information, and they generally feel a little uneasy moving forward with something when they don't have complete information. So jobs that inherently have a lot of information gaps are going to make them feel a little uncomfortable. So they're going to always be after more information and complete information. On the other side, we have what are called inductive thinkers or diagnostic problem solvers. Called diagnostic because these people literally can diagnose a situation, a person, a problem in very quickly with limited information under limited with limited time. So doctors often have this. If you're working in an ER, you need to be able to stabilize the patient, even if you don't have all the information at your disposal. A lot of lawyers think this way. And interestingly, anthropologists, archaeologists get really high scores on the diagnostic side. They score more as diagnostic problem solvers because the nature of their work is a lot of gaps in information. You're studying people in civilizations from 1,000 years ago. You can't go talk to these people. There are naturally going to be gaps. And so this is the continuum. And then, of course, there's always people who land somewhere in the middle. So people who are diagnostic problem solvers really thrive. They're kind of like the heroes in a pinch. They thrive in a little bit of chaos, actually, because they can assess a situation very quickly, figure out what's wrong, and kind of solve that problem or rectify the situation.
Okay. So we've talked about two different types of aptitudes. The first one, we were talking about the focusers versus the brainstormers. That's how you generate ideas.
Yep.
And then this last one, when you were talking about fact checkers versus diagnostic problem solvers, we're talking about like how you reason
Solve
your
problems.
way through a problem.
Yeah,
how do you solve a
exactly.
problem? Do you want to go in and check all the facts, or do you kind of like make these connections and kind of pull a rabbit out and say, here's your diagnosis? So those are really helpful to know when you're thinking about a career change or the career that you're in, so that you can capitalize on these geniuses. Like if you don't know the way that you work, then you can't optimize the way that you work. And you also don't know what your traps are, like how your genius could become a problem. Because fact checkers, I actually don't know if I would score super high on that one. It just may be that I hate those visual tests, but fact checkers can be obnoxious. If they need, they're are they the ones that are like checking the receipts at the restaurant? I mean, it's like
they're the ones who will say, they'll say, Diana, let me sleep on it and get back to you.
Okay.
Let's go check our sources. Let's go verify, check and verify. They might be checking the receipts. That's actually a great example. But, I have to say, some people will call diagnostic problem solvers annoying. They'll say, oh, they're so rash. Oh, they bought the first wedding dress they ever tried on.
Well,
they
yeah.
married the first person they kissed or something. That's an extreme example. But yeah, they typically like to move pretty quickly. And they can connect the dots, fill in the gaps, identify missing pieces, and go forward with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's because I married a fact checker. It took him like 6 months to buy a mattress because we had to research every mattress.
Sounds about right.
Pros and cons of going with the latex. Well, my back hurts because we need a new mattress. And I'm like, let's just buy this one. It felt good to me.
But what a great balance, though. I think that's that it's great. We don't want people with our identical aptitudes.
Okay, so then let's talk about the other two. Another one. This is the one where you fold up the paper and punch the holes. So spatial visualization.
Yeah.
And it also had this dimension to it. So you can be an abstract thinker on one end. You can be a 3D visualizer on the other end. And then somewhere in the middle, a space planner. So tell us about this, like how you would approach your work in these different types of genius with spatial visualization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll give an example that I think really sums up those three. So yes, this was an assessment that looked at your ability to think three-dimensionally or abstractly. And I have a friend who went to architecture school, and she was successful, but it was a lift, right? Like she talks about how it was really sort of taxing being in school. And she always felt like she just had to sort of work a lot harder than her friends to keep up. And it was really exhausting. But she did it. She finished. She was fine. But what she ended up getting into was real estate development. And she told me in our interview for the book, she said, I'm just more interested in how people use their physical space, how they work with their physical space, how they move in and out of their physical space. And she scored as a space planner. This is someone who has a knack, a definite knack for understanding spatial concepts and ideas. They have an understanding of aesthetic. They understand how a room should be set up to kind of flow. But when it came to actually being an architect and doing those designs, that was a little too taxing. That's the ideal kind of work for a three-dimensional thinker, a spatial thinker. Now, someone who's abstract, another person we interviewed for the book, does consulting, business consulting. She's all about the human element of the workplace. So what is going on behind the numbers? That's how she describes how she shows up at work. And she's an abstract thinker. A lot of people in business, law, counseling, and psychology are abstract thinkers.
So it was helpful for me to read that when you talked about that being more in the verbal, like you're thinking more in a verbal way than necessarily a visual way when you're more the abstract thinker. Is that correct?
Yeah. So verbal and in a relational way.
Relational. Yeah. Human relations. Yeah.
Exactly. But this is also why often people, young kids who are three-dimensional, it often goes unrecognized for years. I mean, I've given this assessment to students who are about to graduate, and they had no idea. And they maybe struggled in school. They maybe didn't understand why they were struggling, or they thought something was wrong with them. They had this amazing gift that was not being tapped. And that's always tough to see.
Yeah, I interviewed this coffee farmer for my book, Jay Ruskey, and the way he's like, you interview friends. Let's just get honest here. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, totally.
And he talked about he had dyslexia as a kid. He had a really hard time in school, and he had such a gift for being able to see the land, understand how to set up an avocado tree so that it supports a passion fruit, so that it shades the coffee orchard, and how that whole system works. And I was thinking about him with this sort of like visual 3D way of seeing things that now has led him to be super successful in the coffee industry. I mean, he's got like over 60 different coffee orchards all over California that he's contributing to. But again, it came from this like genius about him. And I bet if he took an aptitude test when he was in school, when he was 13, 14, 15, or getting ready to go to college, that would have helped guide his decision making versus us just sort of being like, I don't know, I'm kind of good at this, I'll sort of do that.
Right.
This would be really helpful for people that are entering into their career as well.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's such I love that example. We actually interviewed a young woman for the book who also has dyslexia, was sort of always put in like special help groups at school. And she just didn't know what her gifts were, what her talents were. Turns out she's incredibly three-dimensional. And when we helped her recognize that, it gave her the confidence to then go forward into school. And she actually ended up going into real estate. She loved staging houses, like, just thought that was the coolest thing and how things need to be set up and put together. But yeah, you're exactly right. This should be celebrated, and this should be part of how we guide people, young and old.
Great. So we've talked about 3 of the 4 aptitudes. Spatial visualization, which is what we just talked about, idea generation, inductive reasoning, and then the 4th one was sequential reasoning. And you talk about being a sequential thinker versus a process supporter, how we solve problems sort of in this logical way. How do you assess that? What were the questions on the test that were assessing that?
Yeah, so basically we gave you a series of words or ideas or concepts and asked you to organize them into the most logical order. So, head, toes, shoulders, knees would be, head, shoulders, knees, toes.
Okay, that was one of the ones that I really liked that I just
flew through.
Yes.
You just flew through it.
That one. It made a lot of sense.
Yes, so very logical. Yeah, so people like you, sequential thinkers, are very logical. They're able to take a lot of ideas and organize them into a natural flow or sequence that makes sense. And that's efficient. And they can do this very quickly in their heads. That's important, right? So there are people who need to write all these things down. Sequential thinkers don't necessarily need to do that. And so for that reason, they can actually come off as somewhat disorganized.
Yes.
I'll often, people always laugh when I tell them they're sequential. They'll say, but you should see my bedroom, or you should see my house or my
Yeah.
office. That has nothing to do with it, because the point is you're organized up here in your head. You know
Oh, this is
exactly
going to
where
go over
everything
well in school. It's organized in my head.
totally. Yeah, it's like the dog ate my homework. Well,
Yes.
and if you are managing a team, for example, the process and the systems make total sense in your brain. And then when you try to deliver them to your team, they come out all jumbled and confused. Right. And so that is a common theme for sequential thinkers. They can just get really frustrated. Like, why can't people read my head? Why can't people understand where I'm coming from? And so if you are a sequential thinker and you learn how to, and you put work into communicating with your team, you will be an amazing leader, because you're very organized. You have great sort of logical systems thinking going on up there. And then if you can communicate that to your team, then you're all on the same page. It's great. So
Yes.
yeah, these are the people who plan great vacations. They plan the road trips. They know how to efficiently get from A to Z without wasting any motion.
Oh yeah, no waste.
No waste.
That is my motto. Super efficient.
Exactly.
Uh, what's the other end of that? If everything is sort of on this
Yeah.
dimension, what's at the other end?
The process supporters, I love these people. So process supporters will take a system and they will memorialize it and they will codify it. And they will make sure that they follow it to a T. And then they will make sure everyone on your team is following it to a T. The process supporters are the people who follow every sort of detailed instruction when they're baking a cake.
Yes.
Like, and they will let the cake dry or cool before they ice it, right? Like, I never do that. I never let it cool before I
This
ice
is
it.
my virtual assistant. Shout out to my virtual assistant who is
Yeah,
so like thorough in every single step. And the problem is that she has me giving her this disorganized mess. She has to like sort through it and organize it and make it in this very stepwise, thorough process. So
absolutely.
grateful to people that have that kind of brain. I mean, it's super helpful to keep us. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they will make sure you stick to your own plan, right?
Yes.
That you've maybe created the system and the plan, but maybe you don't always stick to it. You skip steps or whatever and things get messy. They will
Yes.
make sure you stick to your own plans. Mhm.
Great. So if you are, looking more at sort of a team aspect, then maybe when we look at these aptitudes so that we cohesively work together as a whole better, is that part of
Certainly in placing your team into the right types of activities and roles, and also, most importantly, empathizing and having understanding when a teammate is frustrated in a certain work context. So, for example, in a small business or a startup where you're wearing a lot of hats, right? That's how it is in my business. We're all wearing a lot of hats, and I have a process supporter on my team who I know can get a little bit flustered when we're shifting things really quickly. We were doing it this way, and then overnight we're doing it this way because we need to, better accommodate our clients, or we've learned that our clients want something else, and we need to accommodate. So we need to stay really nimble. That can be a little bit more difficult for the process supporter who's just put so much, time and effort into learning a plan and codifying that plan, right? And so I think if we just have empathy and understanding, that's number one. That's going to get us off on the right track.
great. Okay, so we spent some time at the very beginning talking about our personality style. And then we
Mhm.
talked about these 4 aptitudes. You have some extras, some amplifiers, which I'll let people buy the book to find out what the amplifiers are. And then this third part is interests. What interests us? Where do we feel alive and a lot of energy when we're engaging with certain activities? So this is the third foot of the stool.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about this part of our hidden
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah. So, as I said at the top of the interview, we use an assessment called U Science, which my co-author helped found, and that assessment uses a pretty old, well known and respected interest inventory called the Hull and Ryasek Interest Inventory. And so there are 6 interests that we test, or that we're sort of surveying you in. And what it looks like is we'll give you a series of questions. How interested are you in developing a cure for cancer? And sort of the scale, and you say how interested you are in this. And based on those selections, you get your top 3. So your top 3 interest areas. And so, for example, you might be someone who's really drawn to very hands-on, or what we call realistic work. You might be someone who is really interested in work that involves a lot of problem solving and investigating and figuring things out. You might be someone who's drawn to artistic work, which, by the way, is a lot of not just art, but counseling is actually pretty artistic. Anything where you get some creative autonomy. Um, Social, are you interested in work that helps other people? Enterprising, do you like work that allows you to be entrepreneurial and competitive and persuasive? And conventional, do you like work that has a lot of structure and detail and conventions? So those are all just based on your self-reported interests, which is interesting to know, but we also like to let people know that those things can change and are very influenced based on like what you watched last night or who you just spoke to on an airplane. Those can all sort of influence our interests. And so what we have in the assessment is this opportunity to toggle between career matches based on aptitudes and career matches based on interests. And often you get very different results based on those two fits.
Okay, so you wanna kinda try and combine them, or what are you doing with that
Yeah,
information then?
so we definitely like to show people the overall, right? So what the best, where all those circles meet. But when I'm delivering this assessment to a younger audience, I actually encourage them to spend a little more time investigating the aptitude fits because the aptitudes are kind of the blind side, right? Those are the things we're probably not going to explore because we don't self-report as being interested in those things. And there was an amazing study that was done a few years ago that showed that women and girls will often self report interests that do not align with careers in science and technology and engineering and math. And even though their aptitudes line up really well with some of those careers. And so, there are many reasons why we self report having certain interests. It, again, could be based on what we're seeing in the media, what we've seen in our families, what we're hearing at school. But the point is there's a huge, not a talent gap, an exposure gap. We don't know ourselves fully and completely. And so we're putting ourselves into um, careers that are often misaligned.
Right, because our chemistry professor wasn't a female. I mean, it could be
Correct.
as
Yeah,
basic as that, like,
literally, that's
you do not
exactly
relate to them, right? I remember
right.
when I was choosing my advisor, Linda Craighead, part of the reason why I chose her was that she had young kids, and I could be like, "Oh, okay, this is how you could be a psychologist and do research and have young
Oh,
kids." That was something that was important to me, having a family, and I hadn't seen examples of that, right? So there
absolutely.
isn't models of, I mean, hopefully this is changing, but women in science, especially women of color in science, it may even shape our interests or what we think is possible or how we could envision ourselves if we haven't seen that model or
Abs-
been encouraged. Or I mean, there's so much going on there.
yeah.
Interesting. So
Happy.
you would encourage these young adults that are moving towards thinking about, I mean, I even hate saying the word career because it changes over time, but as they're
Yes.
thinking about where they want to put their energy in terms of studying or trade or whatever, to look at aptitude
Yeah.
and start there. Okay.
Absolutely, because when you're in high school or even college, you just have not had enough exposure to really accurately like influence your interests and really help you figure out what you're interested in. So I think it's two things. It's looking at your aptitudes and letting that guide your initial career search, and then also getting like actual real world exposure, right? Like so through interning and job shadowing and just talking to people and getting good mentors like you did. I think all of those things are hugely important.
I think with interests, at least what I'm encouraging my son to do, this came out of a book by Cal Newport, which is a great
Oh
book
yeah.
called How to Be a High School Superstar. It's
Love
not
that
one of
book.
his bestsellers, but it's so,
I
do you love
love
that?
that book.
Didn't you love it?
Yes.
We read it together. And what he talks a lot about is just seeking out a lot of different, diverse, and varied, interesting things. And that's how you become interesting or how you develop your interests. At this
Yes.
age, at that younger age, it's just trying out a lot of stuff, just saying yes to every single
Absolutely.
opportunity you can say yes to, and having enough space in your, he talks a lot about having enough space in your
Yes.
schedule to do that, as
Downtime.
opposed to the monotaskers that have no room to go explore, pickleball or the surf team or whatever. So it's really important to have that space to just explore. And their brains are designed to explore, right? They want to go out and try out new things at that age. So it's a great way to develop interests, maybe
Absolutely.
outside of has been pre-programmed by their parents or society of what they should be
Yes.
interested in.
I think it's so fun, especially, w coming from this world where I talk about aptitudes all day and talk about personality and interests, and I have given this assessment to so many people to see my own daughter develop into this, yeah, unique individual human,
Yeah.
who has interests and talents that I do not possess at all.
Yeah.
And it's so exciting. It really is.
My son is currently building a multiple level dirt bike jump in my yard right now, where he is digging large piles of dirt into big piles for him and his teenage friends to jump off of on their bikes. I'm like,
Yes,
1, it's ugly.
absolutely.
2, it's risky. And 3, go for it.
Go
Because
for it.
you're outside and you're developing your
Absolutely.
interests, and it's really good for you. But
Oh,
these are the
I
things
love
like our
that.
kids just that their aptitudes are. I mean, I think he's a spatial reasoner for sure. And yeah, so this was
Yeah.
super helpful. I think that folks, you mentioned that it's cheap, it's inexpensive, this assessment. And
New
if you
word.
get your hidden genius, you get access
You
to
do.
this test, but you can also take the test without the book. I would recommend getting the
Yes.
book because you'll understand it better if you read the book.
It's your guide. For sure,
It's
we
your guide.
notice that people who
Yeah.
just take the assessment without any kind of guide, whether it's a human guide or what we hope this will be the book guide, it doesn't quite land, right? Like it doesn't all sink in the right way. And so we're really excited for this to be an accompaniment.
Great. Well, thank you, Alex. I'm so glad that we connected around this concept of genius, and you have a really different perspective and angle, and it's really fun to learn about your work and what you and Betsy are doing. And I just wish you the best and great success with this book. I hope it helps people and reaches many in finding their hidden genius.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. Thanks so much. And I'm glad there was some serendipity there around genius. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell & Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.